Okay, so let's jump right in. Today we're doing a deep dive into something called proba peritial, expert evidence in the Romano-Germanic civil law system.
Yeah.
We've been looking through a bunch of legal texts, trying to get a handle on how this system incorporates specialized knowledge into legal cases, just to see how it compares to other legal systems out there,
Right.
especially if our listeners are familiar with maybe like a common law system.
Yeah. And it's a pretty crucial area these days, especially with all the advancements in technology and how complicated things are getting.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's like judges are experts in the law,
Right.
but they're not necessarily experts in everything else.
Exactly. They're generalists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is where expert evidence becomes like really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
One thing that really jumped out at me while we were prepping for this was how much emphasis there is on the expert's impartiality.
Oh, definitely.
Like it's considered super important for their credibility,
Absolutely.
but also for the system as a whole, because they're aiming for truth
Yeah.
through this unbiased contribution of expert knowledge.
Right. And it's also worth mentioning that proba peritial is just one of the recognized means of evidence within the whole civil procedure code.
Okay.
So it's not the only thing. Witness testimony, documents, things like that.
Uh.
All that stuff is regulated, how it's admitted, presented, evaluated.
Okay, so let's break down proba peritial.
Right.
What is it in like simple terms? What are we actually talking about here?
Sure. So it's basically the opinion
Okay.
of someone who has this specific knowledge or expertise in a field.
Uh-huh.
And it's presented to the judge
Yeah.
to clarify certain facts in a case.
So it's like having a specialist come in and say, okay, judge, this is how this works.
Yeah, exactly. This is what this means.
This is what you're actually looking at.
Precisely. And the expert's job then is to interpret that information
Okay.
and present it.
So why bother? Why bring in these experts?
Well, the main reason is that judges, they don't have this specialized knowledge in every single field.
Right.
So this helps them make these really informed decisions
Yeah.
by, clarifying certain things
Uh-huh.
that they might not be able to understand otherwise.
Right.
And offering insights beyond just general knowledge.
Okay.
And the important thing here is that the expert, they don't dictate the legal outcome.
Okay.
They just help the judge understand the facts of the case.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So how does expert evidence get accepted in a court?
Okay.
Let's use Spain as an example.
So in Spain, they have the law of civil procedure called the LEC,
Okay.
and it sets out specific criteria.
Yeah.
The evidence has to be legal, it has to be relevant to the case,
Uh-huh.
and it has to be useful for the court's decision.
Right.
And then on top of that, the expert report usually has to be submitted really early in the process.
So there are deadlines involved here.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so that's admissibility.
Yes.
What about the expert themselves? Who can actually be considered an expert?
So they need demonstrable knowledge
Okay.
and experience in their specific field.
Mm.
So you have to be able to prove that you actually know what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be official qualification,
Okay.
specific training, professional registration.
Yeah, so it's not just anybody off the street who says, oh, I know about that.
Definitely not. And it's interesting, different countries approach this a bit differently.
Okay.
Like Germany tends to prefer publicly certified experts,
Uh-huh.
whereas in France, for example, they'll usually only bring in an expert if the case is just so complicated that a judge can't figure it out just by looking at the evidence.
Right, it has to go beyond just normal observation.
Exactly.
Okay, and it sounds like there are mechanisms for challenging the expert
Oh, absolutely.
if there are doubts about their expertise.
Yep.
or if a report is submitted too late.
Absolutely. Like if the evidence isn't really relevant or if the expert, missed the deadline.
Right, so there are ways to make sure the right people are involved.
Exactly.
Okay, so I'm curious, who actually chooses the expert?
So in the Romano-Germanic system, it's generally the court
Okay.
or the judge themselves who does the selecting.
So it's not like the lawyers each get to bring in their own experts.
Not usually. That's a big difference from common law systems.
Okay.
Here, the focus is very much on the expert being impartial.
Okay, so no dueling experts.
Right, exactly.
How does this selection process work?
Well, it kind of depends on the specific country.
Uh-huh.
So in Spain, the court will appoint an expert if a party asks for one, or sometimes even if nobody asks, especially in family law cases.
Okay.
And parties can actually suggest experts that they think would be suitable.
Okay.
France, on the other hand, allows judges to choose from official lists,
Okay.
or even just anyone they see fit.
Wow.
Yeah, if they think that person has the right knowledge. Germany tends to prioritize publicly certified experts, but they might consult with the parties. And Italy relies really heavily on these specialized registers that each court maintains.
So there are like official lists?
Exactly. And these lists, they usually have requirements for, what kind of qualifications and experience you need to be on there.
Right. So there's a process to get on that list.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And if anyone has concerns about the impartiality of an expert,
Yeah.
their appointment can be challenged.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so you've got this expert. They've been appointed. What are some typical situations where you would see them brought in?
Oh, it's used in so many areas.
Okay.
So you've got forensic science, like DNA analysis or ballistics,
Okay.
and then financial assessments, like figuring out damages in a case or evaluating assets, medical evaluations for personal injury cases,
Yeah.
construction disputes where you need an engineer to come in. Digital forensics is becoming a huge area.
Right, because that's so complicated now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Anytime you have a situation where specialized knowledge is needed to understand what happened, you might call in an expert.
Okay. So let's say the expert has been appointed. They've done their investigation.
Yeah.
They've prepared a report.
Uh-huh.
How is that presented to the court?
So typically, the expert submits this detailed written report.
Okay.
It outlines their analysis, their methodology, and their conclusions.
Uh-huh.
And they might also be called to give oral testimony.
Okay, so they might have to come and speak to the judge.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes to clarify things from the report or to answer questions.
Makes sense. And how much weight does the expert's opinion carry?
Well, that's where things get interesting.
Okay.
Because the judges, they evaluate the evidence using something called sana critica.
Sana critica.
Yeah, which basically means sound judgment.
Okay.
It's their own reasoned evaluation based on, logic, common sense,
Yeah.
and their understanding of the field.
Ah.
But crucially, they're not automatically bound by whatever the expert says.
So it's not like the expert's word is final.
Right, exactly. The judge has to think about it.
Okay, so the judge has the final say. Yeah.
But they can't just dismiss the expert's view.
Not without good reason. They have to justify why they disagree.
Okay.
And the expert's impartiality and their qualifications, that all plays a big role in how much weight the judge gives their opinion.
It's all part of that sana critica idea, right?
Exactly. And if there are, conflicting expert reports, the judge really has to carefully analyze everything and decide which opinion is more credible.
That must be tough.
Yeah, definitely.
So it sounds like the judge has a much more active role here
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
than in some other legal systems.
Definitely. They actively scrutinize the expert's methodology, they can question the expert directly, and they can even draw upon their own general knowledge.
Okay.
And like we mentioned, sometimes they even have to sort out these disagreements between different experts.
Wow. So how does all of this compare to what happens in, say, common law systems?
So one big difference is how experts are chosen.
It's usually the court who appoints them in the Romano-Germanic system, not each side individually.
Yeah.
The rules for admissibility are different too.
Uh-huh.
And the presentation of the expert's findings is usually more focused on written reports.
Rather than like live testimony.
Exactly. And then there's this sana critica principle for evaluating the evidence, which is much more explicit than in some common law systems.
Yeah.
And overall, the expert is really seen more as an impartial aid to the court, helping them understand the facts.
Gotcha. Okay, so let's wrap up. What's the main takeaway about Pruba Purisha?
So it's really a cornerstone of how the Romano-Germanic system integrates specialized knowledge into legal cases to make sure judges can understand these complex issues.
Uh-huh.
And the big things to remember are the focus on court-appointed impartial experts
Okay.
and the judge's active role in evaluating the evidence using sana critica.
And that's really different from what a lot of us are used to, right? It makes you think, how does this approach, with all its emphasis on judicial oversight, actually compare to what we see in other legal systems?
Yes.
Like, what are the pros and cons of each?
Right.
It's definitely something to think about.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks for joining me for this deep dive. I think we all learned a lot today about expert evidence and how it works.
Yeah, it's been great.
Definitely a fascinating topic.
Uh-huh.
All right, thanks again.
Thanks.